How you doing, Aspasia?
I'm doing.
You're
Doing.
doing? Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
I'm in the process of being something. I'm all right. I'm all right, Daniel. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I have been thinking about, well, there are three things, and I don't actually know if they go together at all, but three things are top of my mind. So I'll say them and we'll see. So I've been thinking about prayer, I've been thinking about the cross, and I've been thinking about angels.
Nice.
Yeah. Um, it's difficult then to put many more words to either of those things right in this moment. I guess loosely there is something about sort of orientation to an aim, or orientation to when we're going through a painful time, what are we supposed to be doing? What are we supposed to be orienting to? Even using the word supposed to is problematic, but something about orientation, and then there's something about those three ideas that have been top of mind. More will come.
Can I just prayer, cross,
The cross and angels.
and
There's something about the shape of the cross, something about, like, I'm thinking about I guess movement in space, kind of there's the physical body, and then there is more of the spiritual that we've been talking about, how those two things relate. I mean, prayer in and of itself is one that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. What even is prayer? What is it? What are we doing? What are we attempting to do? How that relates to orienting oneself. You know, when you have a painful question, a painful time in life.
well, maybe can I
Please.
pick a few things off?
Yes, let's go.
I might start with prayer, even though I think they're absolutely all related.
Okay.
So very interesting topic. So maybe I contrast it a little bit with our modern culture that thinks that, or we're indoctrinated to think that we have all the answers. And that's sort of reinforced.
Mm.
But yet even in the mental health realms, indeed in any realm, there is always something, call it the unconscious, the subconscious, the higher, the deeper, whatever you want, that we intuitively know is far more intelligent than what we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so in one respect, prayer is a reaching out to that unknown for a response. And it's not something in our modern culture that we particularly is highlighted, because most of probably what I would call prayer these days is affirmations. You know, all the signage that you get, affirm this, I'm a good person. I vision boards, all of these sorts of things. And not to say that they're not legitimate to an extent. But prayer in one way is really this opening up to this unknown, because I realize I don't have a response for whatever reason, the situation, myself. Often I need to see something in myself where I go, I do not know what I'm doing. And like I would call upon a mother or a father or an uncle or someone who I think might have a bit more wisdom in certain things, there's also an intuitive knowledge that no human can help me. So that's quite a big leap. You know, there are things that our close ones can help us with, our mentors, business relationships, and then there's just other things. No human can deal with this. And so it's interesting how all of the language has evolved to, in one sense, it can't say it. It can't say, oh, one needs to reach out to an unknown wisdom. We have to dress it up as something else. In the past, it's called God, right? Christ. But now it's like, oh, there's this wisdom that we all have, but we just don't know it. Well, that's just a lie. If we did know it, we'd have it, but we don't know it. So therefore it's unknown. And so therefore we're needing to reach out to it. So it's certainly my experience, at least in one aspect, is prayer is attempting to change a relationship with myself, to move, in a sense, outside of what I know to something I don't know, trying to enlist a response that so far I'm incapable of responding to myself. But it's that openness. And so that's quite a big leap, in one sense, because it takes us out of the I know everything, or at least I should know everything, or at least there should be someone in the world that knows something that I can tap into, to this other, let's just call it the unseen realm again, that there is another dimension that has something that is far more responsive and that I need to listen to. So there's something very active that's needed from me, but also essentially a leap of faith. And these days, the whole question of faith in the unknown is well, you can't have that. We need to know everything. We need to already have joined the dots. Well, if we could already have joined the dots, if we've already solved the puzzle, everything would be just dandy. But it ain't. So we need to draw on something outside of ourselves, truly outside of ourselves, not only just as an individual, but our humanity. So that, I think, is part of it. I think there's a lot more to it. But it also relates to the cross. It also relates to this notion of, in English, we would call angels, messengers, influences, something that speaks to us, which requires an equal level of having a trust in something other than myself, not to devalue, I'm an instrument, but that acknowledgement that no matter what I do, there is a whole bunch of stuff that I'm just not capable of. That's an ego blow to not only an individual, but to whole communities and politics and everything else. I mean, imagine the president or whatever country that you're from standing up in the middle of a crisis and going, I don't know, but as a nation, why don't we all pray to God? And maybe a response might be found.
The concept of prayer, I think, has always been very mysterious. I think there are many Christians, and perhaps religious people in general, who are quite confused by it. And I sometimes think that perhaps the entire fate of, say, Christianity, if I just focus on that, might be tied to how prayer is used in the religion, and and how is approached and how it is thought about. And there's something interesting that has always been to me about prayer, where people act as if it is self-evident what it is. But then what's interesting is when you compare the prayer culture you often see in Christianity, it is not necessarily reflected in the Bible. Um, I'm not saying there's no precedent for it at all, but it is interesting how it can actually be quite different. Now, of course, the famous Lord's Prayer, everyone knows that. And it's interesting how he gives that as a model. And he says, when you pray, pray like this, right? Now, of course, many, as I understand it, scholars say, well, that was supposed to be a model, not literally verbatim every single time, right? But it is interesting to even look at it as a model, because give us our daily bread, and deliver us from evil, lead us not into temptations. Obviously, I'm out of order, but when you look at the things, there's a certain sort of structure to the prayer that often can seem more participatory. Like, have me actually aligned with what you're already doing, right? Like, and that's very interesting to me because then there is a certain question of how much is prayer requesting God to do something versus getting you in alignment with what God is already doing, right? There's that kind of question, right? And then there's also a kind of idea of if you're praying God for something you want, well, very rarely know what's good for us. We very rarely know what we want, right? And so that's kind of interesting. And then also, again, as you know, my obsession or something I'm constantly stressing is the connection between faith and courage, right? And it is interesting to think of prayer in light of like, pray for me, almost as if you're asking for someone to help me have the spirit to do something courageous, right? Because also when we go back to the early church, like just going to church is, of course, something very, very dangerous, right? And when someone's praying for you, it's interesting to think of, okay, I know those people are praying for me because they know I'm about to do this thing I'm scared to do, or I think God is leading me. And it's actually sort of an encouragement to do something courageous, right? And I do think sometimes prayer should be connected with gaining spirit. Gaining spirit. And spirit, of course, can be tied to courage, but spirit is also tied to alignment. And it is interesting to think of prayer about some sort of gaining of spirit versus gaining of desire, right? And I do also sometimes think when it comes to, like, you were mentioning grief, and Michelle and I have talked about this. Sometimes grief can be used as actually giving yourself the well, you could say the push to do something courageous that you haven't done yet. That actually could be a spiritual breakthrough. That I think those things go together. It is also, I get, there's a lot more to say, I'm also thinking how it is kind of interesting how it's almost like if you move from prayer to cross to angel, the first is the most acceptable, cross is okay, but you get to angels, now that's weird. And how it's almost like there's a kind of ladder there. And it's also kind of interesting to think of, do angels pray, right? Do angels pray? Do angels have to take up their cross every single day? It would almost seem as if angels don't pray. They worship, they seemingly deliver messages, but they don't seem to pray. Now, don't quote me on that. But there's also not so much a stress on angels taking up their cross every single day. And the reason why I say that is because if we take the classic idea, which I'm not saying is correct, but from Aquinas, angels are minds without bodies. Then is there some, it would be interesting to think that therefore there is something about embodiment and prayer that go together, and taking up the cross and embodiment that go together, right? And the reason why that would be important is because one would then expect prayer to have some sort of function that aligns with having a body, like having a body and being whatever the human being is in being embodied, right? And then furthermore, it would seem as if taking up the cross has something to do with a body, right? And having a body, that it is not merely a mental activity. Now, I'll stop, but the last thing I guess I'll say is, again, I always, and I know we've spoken about it before, Aspasia, I always do think it is very interesting to think of prayer in Christianity as also coming up in a historic time when you have a movement from an oral tradition to a written tradition, which, if William Ong is correct, that is also the beginning birth of the inner voice. Like, the idea in an oral tradition is people didn't have a voice inside of them. Like, we have a voice going on all the time, right? Because that's tied to an inner space, and that's tied to reading the signifier and the signified. It makes me think of St. Augustine being mesmerized that his mentor was reading silently. That was considered crazy, read silently, right? And it is interesting to think if there's something about prayer that for the early church was tied to a gradual experience of this new inner voice that people are increasingly experiencing. And that therefore prayer is actually some sort of training of that inner voice. And also, if there's something about any use of the inner voice as actually being on the gradient with prayer and being a kind of prayer. And if you thought of it that way, you might not use that inner voice to constantly be talking about how much you hate your neighbor or complaining or grounding every time, because you're actually in a kind of posture of prayer. And of course, the model for the prayer become the Psalms. Like, those are all considered like models of prayer. And so I think about that, and I think about if you really thought about every time you use your inner voice, you're actually training prayer somehow. You're constantly praying. That you might really think about how you talk to yourself, You might, and yet there's also something to be said as you find yourself with an inner voice going on before you even realizing it, and that therefore actually a life of prayer is not like repressing that and denying it, but actually working at that somehow and training that. But you're not gonna train that inner voice. What I think is very interesting to Luke's point, I don't know if you actually can train your inner voice unless you believe in a higher power. A lot of people talk about the existence of God in order for life to be meaningful and stuff like that, and that's fine. But it's interesting also to think of practical implications of not believing in, say, something beyond you or a higher power. And one of the areas I think it actually is most pronounced is the training of the inner voice. Now, of course, you don't see how other people use their inner voices, but just the way you talk to yourself, I think, is very, very different if you believe in a higher power versus not, right? That and really, if you're constantly like gossiping to yourself or voicing anger and not controlling it, then that really transforms how you are. But if it was a possibility in your mind that every time you use your inner voice you're actually in contact with a higher power, then you'd really, really think about it, right? And I think that also then speaks to things like thinking about its alignment with the cross and angels and things like that. Those are opening thoughts that come to mind.
Yeah, I do have had a genuine struggle with that idea of what you've spoken about before, Daniel, around the sort of the way we use the inner voice, because on the one hand, I actually completely agree with you, and I can. But there's another, I guess there's another way that there's something about like the inner space, and the freedom with which we sort of allow ourselves to be in there. Now, maybe this is like a developmental thing, right? But it's like the need to actually, well, I guess, I mean, if I just reflect on myself, is easier. Being just for whatever reason, it's not like it's a decision I made or something, just for whatever reason, the fact that there was, I feel that there was just this kind of freedom and openness that I had to be able to, I don't know how to put words to this stuff, to like be playful in there. I don't know how or to not, I mean, playful is not even necessarily all it is, but to allow myself to think about whatever I wanted to like think about, or these words are all wrong, but I can't find the language for it. The fact that, and I mean, some of that is because I think that's just the place that I used to go a lot, and that's probably related to loneliness. But the fact that there was so much space in there for me to not feel, I guess what I'm reflecting on is sort of a gratitude, that I had time, when I was younger, especially, where I didn't, for whatever fortune or maybe lack of fortune, whatever it is, for whatever reason, I didn't feel this like sort of crushing sense of needing to edit my inner experience, or like my ability to allow myself to think about whatever, or just kind of, so hard to speak about. There was an openness in there that, I guess if I compare it to, I mean, obviously I'm fortunate enough to sort of get more of an intimate glimpse into the way that other people experience their inner landscapes. And I've seen, I guess, over the years how much suffering can come too from this very tightly held position inside oneself of needing to be on the lookout for all sorts of types of thoughts and all sorts of types of feelings, and quick, like, I need to stamp that one out immediately. And if anyone knows that I even thought that, I'm going to be, killed, or like just these very, there's something about the ability to also have an openness there that has always been, I have always felt, and maybe this will change, has been very helpful. I don't know what words to put on this. And so when we start to talk about, even though I understand what you're saying, when we start to talk about that, cultivating that inner voice as thinking about it almost like it's always prayer and we are like communing with something greater than ourselves. I mean that, yeah, I don't know, those two things, there's something about, and maybe they are just operating in different ways and they are different ways of being in there. I do, yeah. So I guess I guess I don't really have more to say than that. It's a difficult one for me to reconcile, because I do also think there's a way, and I know that you know this, it's nothing new, but there's a way that two people can hear that idea about the inner voice as being a form of prayer, and we should sort of be cultivating what's going on there. People can over apply that, and it turns into all sorts of, a little bit like what you were saying before, Luke, like vision boards and like, you know, only think about things that I want to manifest, and like it can become, again, I think so much of this is probably just tied to where you were getting to there, Daniel, which was it sort of has to, there needs to be a deeper grounding to it spiritually. It can't just be it's sort of a blanket statement of, well, I'm going to work really hard to make sure I edit my thoughts and my inner space so that I am purposely only trying to think about the things that I want to manifest and I want to happen to me. And because if you do that and you rip all the roots away from why you're even doing that, it just becomes another rigid rule, which is just, from my humble perspective, seems to lead to a lot of suffering, and not suffering of a kind that I think is necessarily doing anything valuable, more like a dying, perhaps, than a vitalizing kind of suffering. Yeah. It's very hard to put words to that. I'm guessing you're kind of following what I'm saying, though.
Oh, no. I mean, that's the major tension. And in fact, for me, the very fact that the notion of bringing prayer into the inner life brings a concern about kind of repression and self-editing, to me, is complete evidence we are completely wrong about what prayer is. Because the moment you start thinking about prayer as basically this edited coming before God in this kind of reverential way, there's a kind of automatic sort of, you're saying there is not a continual active participation in what God is doing, like in the work that he is doing, right? And so to me, when you're describing that inner space as that playful space that you're talking about, there's, to me, very much prayer and play in that sort of way strongly go together, actually, like this creative life, this sort of joy that God wants to put forth. Those things are two sides of the same coin. And the very fact that prayer has this connotation of not being playful in a certain way is very, very problematic. Furthermore, to me, if you're editing the inner voice, you're already in trouble, because the inner voice, but this is, to me, the inner voice reflects basically what you're doing with your body. You don't like, what the thoughts that are coming out of nowhere are a reflection of the spaces that you're putting in, the relationship that you're in, the things that you're facing, the courage that you have, et cetera, so forth. And furthermore, there are plenty of times where people are just straight angry at God in the Bible, or the Psalms are full of madness, or bash the enemy on the rocks, right? That's not very edited, right? And yet that seems to be okay. And so to me, the Psalms are just a very interesting model, because there seems to be something going on with prayer there that is almost more, well, I think it gets into the book that Luke and I will do with her, like on the image, the representatives of God. I think prayer has to be tied to a robust notion of what it means to be in the image and likeness of God, and actually God's counsel on earth, and it gets into all of that as well. But what I would just say is everything you're saying, I think, is exactly correct. I think what I would also say is there is a problem where I do think most people, as they become adults, do tend to use the inner voice purely as a place basically of gossip and judgment and talking about how much they dislike people. In a certain sense, that kind of inner voice in a way does need to be edited. But in a way, what you really want to do, instead of editing it before God, what you want to do is see yourself talking about how much you hate your neighbor in front of God. And he just watches, and just, would you really want to be saying that thing if God was watching? If you're editing, you're actually repressing and hiding. So no, don't edit it. Just don't edit it at all. God can take it. Like, and see actually how the experience of that changes you. Like, in that sense, there can be something about prayer that is kind of a purgatory, actually, in a very good way, in a sort of sanctifying way. Now, again, I want to note everything I'm saying about prayer is completely speculative, and I'm not going to say that it has any authority whatsoever. The topic, the topic, I swallowed a fly. The topic of prayer is simply one that I feel as if the church does not have a clear notion on. It feels as if there's something missing, if you will, on how people think about prayer, that I think thus leads to a kind of drifting on the topic of prayer, where actually it does have a repressive structure, or it does have a confused structure, or it's a wish fulfillment structure, and it is therefore not something that is actually actively operating in a person's life as participating in what God is doing. And the question is there a way to think about prayer that better lends it in that direction? I mean, I don't mean to keep going, but I do think you see things where prayer in some churches is just an excuse for people to gossip, or where they're basically nosy or sharing problems. It just becomes actually a vehicle to act in vice, and yet it's called prayer, right? And that can seem very problematic. And yet it also seems to be a problem to act as if prayer isn't. There's something about prayer that's nevertheless central. That's what's very strange. There's something about it that's very central, and yet something about it that many Christians will struggle to think about. And so I don't disagree with anything that you were saying. I think that sort of spirit of play, and then what's very interesting is seemingly the only way you can stay as in play and joy as you mature actually does require going through reverential fear, like a kind of reverence, nevertheless, right? A sort of taking seriously what God is. But on the other side of that is a God of whom actually enables greater joy, not greater gravity, but actually a greater kind of lightness, a dance, if you will. But I'll stop with that.
So I'll throw a few things out, and this is very much sort of drawing on my own experiences here. But for me, what's the missing element? It may be obvious, but I'm not quite sure whether it is. But all prayer seems to start in the intellect, as it must. You know, you need to, as you said, Daniel, one needs to have some kind of angle of concept about, an orientation. And that often comes through an articulation of something. And the Lord's Prayer is a very interesting prayer. Not only do I think it's the model of prayers, but I think it's the prayer of prayers, if you really kind of take it apart a bit. It has some very, very deep meaning to it. But if one of the aims of prayer is to begin to open something, and this is certainly in my experience, that it starts in the intellect, and hopefully through a quality of coming to that prayer, it begins to open up in the feelings. Something moves. I begin to be moved. Some people might call it piety, humbleness, faith, hope, love, all of these words, but something begins to open up. And that also can lead to an opening up in the body, where there's something that keeps vibrating. It's like the body knows how to pray. Might sound odd. In the Gurdjieff sort of work, there's these things called movements, the sacred dances. And that's all about essentially using the language of the body to be in a prayer of movement. And so there's a parallel between what is being said or articulated in the mind, and then something that is being felt or allowed to be felt, while the body is also able to articulate this prayer in movement. And you see that if you see right across the world, to prostrate oneself. Why bow one's head? Very common. It's a movement pattern. And so I was very interested in this because I come from a biomechanical kind of science back in my former life. It's very interesting that some of these postures of worship, of prayer, are quite universal. There is something about how the body opens. I know for Gurdjieff that, he was, and I'm paraphrasing a great deal here, but to just come from the mind only goes no further than your nose. If a prayer can begin to open in the feelings, then it can go a little further. And if it can open in the body, it can go much further, because as you were saying there, Daniel, it seems to be that prayer is something that's quite important to an embodied existence. There's something about bringing all of this earthly stuff, all of this earthly energy to the heavenly. And so that for me is quite interesting, because, often in churches, and in fact most religions, people don't know why they pray. They just do it. It's something they follow. It's, you just say it and it's all good. And while I think that might be helpful, it's very, very limited unless it can begin to come into the body and into the feelings and begin to open up something, so that the prayer is working continuously. There's what's called the unceasing prayer, like the Jesus prayer. It's this quality that's able to seep in more and more, and my being is praying. And for me, that's interesting. And I've certainly been able to verify that if something is able to be brought in, opened up and brought in, and that's the hard bit, how to open to it and allow something to come in, because when something comes in, other things have to drop away. It's like the tale of I don't know who it was, or Buddhist or whatnot, talking about the full cup. If your cup is full, you can't put anything else in there, but you can't just empty the cup. There needs to be something coming in and also something dropping away. So there's this circulation that begins to fill all of the feelings, all of one's states of being, as well as the body. So I feel there that there's something we're missing in the Western world because of this concentration on the intellect. And you only got to do a search online about the literally millions of prayers you can say. But I always have a question. Well, I feel if one could do one prayer with quality that's enabled to come into the feelings, and particularly to come into the body and to feel it reverberating in the body, then that certainly can have a very powerful effect, because it's affecting all of me, not just part of me.
Yeah, there's something in that too about sort of a because I guess that is one thing for me in my stumbling around, having no idea what I'm doing when I'm attempting to pray all my life. It's not, there definitely is the kind of speaking or the using of words, but more than that, it was also like it's an experience of, it's a more sort of focused experience of company or something. I guess that's like a connection thing. And I mean, if I really pay attention to that, that's obviously happening in the body. And I think I was often confused when I would then kind of go to talk about prayer, or I'd see other people talking about prayer, and it was all kind of like you say, Luke, like it was all like emphasis on the intellect. So, and then I was thinking too, as you were just talking there, and you're saying that Gurdjieff has postures, or I was thinking about, which I've talked about before, when I was younger, there was like just Greek music everywhere. I couldn't escape it. And very particular, like tradition-laden Greek music, and particular instruments that, we don't have in kind of music here and then but with that, it's not just the music, it's the Greek dancing, and there's just something about um the embodiment. It's not just joy. So it is joy, like it's joy, but it's also like there was something just off the like very rich tapestry of the emotional that you could see in that kind of dancing as well, and you could hear in the lyrics, and the instruments, just sort of the deepness and the fullness of the whole kind of human emotional experience. And then with the movement and the dancing, and there was just bringing imagery of that into mind as you were talking, Luke. It really is a fullness of the body as well. And the way that there's something about that too, which we've talked about before, I know, but there's something about that too that sort of has connection across like lineage and like time, and it's like a memory of something. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting if you even look at the biblical accounts. There's always, hymns being sung, dances being danced, Christ himself crying. These are you can almost feel all of the prophets and whatever they were going through and praying to God. And you certainly feel it in the Psalms. It was the visceralness of it. It wasn't oh yeah, I'll pray for this, and I'll do the secret thing, and I'll get all these riches. And no, it was agonizing. So I can put it, just agonizing, because there's something that they felt. The physicality of it was just overwhelming, and that for me always comes through. And then I guess, well, how have we arrived at this institutionalized form of prayer, where as long as we tick the box and say what we need to say, and it's done in an all very calm and very kind of politically correct way. No, it misses something, becomes dry. It Gurdjieff says, only goes no further than your nose. But certainly in my own account, where there's been a deep despair because I have no idea. I mean, really, not just an intellectual, if I only had more information, I'd be fine. It is a gut-wrenching, I do not know my way out of this at all. And then something's able to, the potency of it, the power of it's able to maybe reach up and maybe connect to something at a greater energetic level, say. And then something's able to synchronize a line, like Daniel was saying, but there's a response there. I may not like the response, too, right? But one feels it. One feels okay, I go this way rather than that way. Or I refrain from doing something, or I need to do whatever it might be. I'd certainly, in my experience, it's not always pillars of fire. No, I've certainly had a couple of experiences where that was literally the case. But there is something wholehearted about it. And I know that we've spoken of this in the sphere of mental health care and other bits and pieces, where if that was felt like that and it was demonstrated like that, you'd be put in the nut house. So there's something here that's being constrained, and maybe it needs that freedom, maybe that freedom that you were talking about, aspasia, that there is a landscape, particularly when I'm younger, because I don't know the constraints, I am free. And aren't children wonderful? Like, when they've really cracked the shits, like it's just all there. And then as adults, we go, oh, no, we're not allowed to do that anymore. Let's keep everything calm and contained. And while that might be helpful most of the time, there are times where it's like, Something needs to move through you in order to find that alignment again. And it can't just be in your head.
It would be extremely interesting to actually pull out every single prayer in the Bible and like make a book just of them to kind of examine like how prayer is used. Because I'm finding, I mean, yeah, the Psalms are lyre, they're sung, right? There is absolutely well, there's a bunch of things. There is something about prayer that the way it seems to function as almost a culture. Like it seems like a culture, not just something you do, but it is an expression of an entire life that you live, right? And there's something about prayer that's supposed to have a certain exuberance, like an overflow of life, almost in a Nietzschean child, like dancing star, right? Like this kind of abundance of life. And I suppose, and again, I completely agree. And again, it is all just speculative. And I think about it often on this idea of the inner voice is prayer. Like, is your inner voice this exuberant life? Is it this dancing life, or is it constantly full of worry and fear? Is your inner voice this full life? Is your inner voice singing? Is your inner voice telling poetry? Is your inner voice dancing? Is your inner voice a person even? Does it feel like a person or something disembodied, right? Is it like a living story, right? And there's something to me about no, often just some form of repression. And the very fact that prayer feels as stiff and as if it is itself repressive, that there's like you're actually supposed to leave the body out of it. You're supposed to leave your anger out of it. You're supposed to leave your emotion, thus turns it into this thing that is holding the church back. I guess that goes back to what I was saying, but there's something about prayer for me that seems like if we get it wrong, the entire church is held back. Like everything is held back in a very serious way. And yet it is an interesting topic. It's a tricky topic. Now, again, if I'm thinking about prayer and cross and angels too, there's something where I want to say that without prayer, you would never take up a cross. And the reason why I say that is because, and if my internet's messing up, I'll switch it. I can't do this storm's coming. But there's something about, I want to say without prayer, you're not going to take up a cross. Now, someone would hear that and they say, well, that's not true. There are people who do hard stuff all the time, right? Like there are atheists do difficult things. They don't seem to have prayer. Yeah, but something that's very important about the cross is not merely something difficult. It is something that as you do, everyone sees as not a hardship, or they see it as crazy, or they see it as madness, right? Like it is not simply enough to do something difficult and that be taking up the cross. It's doing something difficult that is not really even readily intelligible to other people as the right thing to do. And that's actually part of the cross, right? Like you're not going to do something that is difficult or is self-sacrifice that is not even seen or understood as self-sacrifice unless you have like an inner prayer life that's connected to a higher power, right? And so if we understand the cross as not merely difficulty, because I think often the language of cross is just a challenge. I'm going through a hard time. And don't get me wrong, I think that's on the gradient. There's definitely suffering in Christianity. But when we think about the cross in particular, like when Jesus takes up the cross, like he's a criminal. Like it's actually justice to kill him. In fact, he's a heretic, right? Like you're doing something difficult, and then it's not even seen as you doing something difficult. You're actually being punished as you ought to do, right? Like by the logic of man, this is actually justice or something, right? So in that sense, your suffering is also hidden, right? Or your suffering is not even seen as suffering. Well, that is something that seemingly prayer would be necessary to take on. And I actually think that many of people's key moments in their life are actually these moments of suffering that are not seen by other people as suffering, or these moments of suffering that you're alone with, or it's not intelligible to the social order. I would call that the non-rational. And if you don't do it, you end up in a rational impasse, right? And so there's something about prayer that seems to be tied. There's something about prayer that seems to be readying yourself for participation in these key moments, or I would say the entire life of God. There's also an issue, like, so if like prayer is to be actually ready, to be able to actually bear the cross as we're describing it here when it's time. And if you haven't tasted the joy, Like, if you haven't had that worship in God, like that joy, like there's something to be said that you're not going to do it, because you're not going to have a feeling of what's on the other side, or because to the cross, because of the joy set before me, right? So there's something about that that's really tied. And also, you're not going to take up the cross in the way I'm describing, as a self-concealing enclosure, unless you've worked it into the body. Because if it's simply a mental thing, mentally, it doesn't make sense. Mentally, everyone thinks it's crazily. Mentally, you wouldn't do it, right? And so you end up in the rational impasse, and you're stuck there. I'm also thinking about but I'll pause and switch the internet real quick. But I do always think it's just very interesting as well. Like, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So first, it's almost as if it's possible for people not to hallow thy name, right? Like, hallowed be thy name, right? So it's a call for people to treat it as holy, because maybe it's not being treated as holy. It's also interesting if Jesus just said, I mean, I guess the Lord's Prayer is in Luke and Matthew, but in Matthew, it's like, oh, by the way, when you pray, go alone in your room, right? Which is also very interesting. Go alone in your room, right? But it starts with our Father. Well, who's in there with you if you're alone in your room and it's our Father, right? As if it's a call to humanity, like our Father. It also has a kind of suggestion of being part of a certain host. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, and what's on earth as it is in heaven. What's also very interesting about thy will be done, you don't have to pray to ask God to do, like, a lot of prayer is like God's not doing anything and he won't do something until you pray. But there's something about thy will be done that suggests God's will is already happening, right? Like, sometimes there's prayer as if we don't pray, God's not going to act. But really, it's like thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, I'm assuming God's will is happening in heaven. Like, it's not like it's static up in heaven, right? So that kind of livingness one would also expect on earth. But what's interesting is, so far, the posture, like, hallowed be thy name, thy will be done, it's all participatory. It's not so like we pray as if we're summoning, like, if we don't pray, God's not going to act. And you hear Christians say that, right? And I don't want to say there's no truth to that, because clearly there's also something, I guess. I know I'm still good, but there's also something about prayer in the Bible that's tied to prophecy. Like, that's also a really important element. Prayer and prophecy is because in the Bible, like, God had a prophecy, and it's really hard to believe this thing's going to happen. So we're praying to, like, stay faith in the prophecy, right? Like, there's something about prayer and remembering what God has said. Like, there's also memory and prayer seem to go together, right? Like, God unveiled something to you and you just tend to forget. Like, and prayer is tied to actually memory, right? So there's something with, thy will be done on earth. So there's something participatory. And then, and give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us, or our debtors. And, and it's interesting as well. And I have more to say about this stuff, but it's also really important. And, deliver us from evil. Well, that's the end of the prayer, actually. Like, deliver us from evil. Then later on, they're like, that's kind of open-ended. So let's add something about, thy kingdom come on earth as let's add something to make it, like, clear. But it's interesting that in Matthew, when it ends, and deliver us from evil. Amen. Like, that's a sending out. Like, deliver us from evil, because we got it. Like, it's sending out. It's not closed like a loop. The reason why I think that's really important is because many times people pray and it kind of ties a knot, like it ties a bow. So there's nothing to be done. Right. But the Lord's Prayer is basically like, and lead us not into temptation and deliver us from evil. Amen. That's clearly a call. It's time to go. We got to do something, clearly. And I think also I want to stress participatory, like the participatory nature of prayer. It sounds as if you're trying to align yourself with something God is doing, and a certain open-endedness that is there, right? And I think basically that is going to require the full body and the full emotional life and worship and the joy to actually go forth. There are more things to say, but I'll pause.
Well, maybe I might just, because you raised some really good points there, Daniel, about the cross. Because often that alignment, or seeking a response of how I can better align, is more often than not going against the grain of things. So this and this is the interesting thing about prayer, if I do pray and I'm open, I've also have to be very intentional with whatever then I receive, it's incumbent upon me to act on. And so that's in one sense, that's the cross. In some of the mystery schools, the cross is a very interesting sign. There's this, because it's got the verticalness as well as the horizontal. And so there's all sorts of kind of meanings wrapped in around that. But that intentional life, if I'm opening myself to something and I'm wishing to receive, it's also incumbent upon me to act on. It's like the talents, it's the gifts, all of these things that if you're going to get it, you better use it, right? And if you don't use it, it'll be taken away from you. It'll be given to someone else. And so that's that sort of interesting part. That's that nature of this very strange exchange that happens. You see it all the time normally in life. People are given all these wonderful opportunities that they just never capitalize on, you know? So in a sense, kind of prayer is a little bit like that. If you get something that says a little bit more this way rather than that way, right? Or to have patience or whatever it is, then there's something, and this is why the body's important, as you were saying, that I need the ability to act. And so that brings in a question, well, what's that ability? And that's courage, it's bravery, the capacity to suffer, not for yourself, but for something else, passing through something. And that's where, in order to move through something, I think effectively, you need to hook yourself onto something that's in a sense outside of you, because we don't have the capacity to do it ourselves, even though our whole culture is very much all about me, 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 me. That leads to a central implosion. And no wonder we've got all sorts of, kind of mental health crises. But to recognize I can't do it all myself, to recognize I need to open and to be readily accepting of what comes my way in the capacity that I have, is kind of like the whole kind of package. It's like you need to be a little bit of everything in order to do one thing. And so that's that, that great leap of faith, if you'd like, is that there is no being a little bit pregnant. It's like, okay, if I'm going to do this, then as best as I can, I need to accept the conditions. And if I reject any of it, I reject all of it. And so that's particularly with Christianity. Gurdjieff talks a lot about this, is, make sure go in with eyes wide open, make sure because once you start, if you turn around, then you'll be sliding back even further than where you began. And so there's all these little kind of dangers there. So that cross for me, being able to take it up kind of daily, is this renewal act, if you'd like, of yes, I need to accept what's put in front of me if I'm asking for it. And then, of course, it very much sort of ties into this notion of angels, of all these messages, all these influences that we might receive, and to be able to discern what's just part of the fabricated imagination and fantasy, which we're all prone to, as opposed to something genuine that's coming in. And that's incredibly difficult, because again, I need to be open to it, but yet skeptical. Where in our modern culture, it's like, well, if you're open to that, you're a little crazy. And so people just close that door, even if it's being knocked on really hard. That door is then closed. And the other extreme is you just open yourself up to everything, and you don't know what's what. And that also leads to all sorts of strange kind of dead ends and sort of rabbit holes. So it's really interesting that all of our faculties of intelligence in the mind, the feelings, and the body is kind of brought to bear on this prayer, cross, and angels. It's an interesting triadic relationship, very Trinitarian.
Something too, even as you were talking about sort of openness, the needing to be open, and then also the needing to be skeptical. Again, it makes me think of the cross. Like, there's kind of like the openness is maybe the horizontal, and then you can have like the skeptical. It's like it's the meeting point of it's the meeting point of those two axes. Now it's making me think about graphs, but yeah, it's I have nothing really further to add than that. Just outside of yeah, this is really all the imagery that I had around all of this is kind of, you're both putting words to it in wonderful ways, and I'm just listening right now. Really, I have not much more to add than images, but that is part of what has been coming to mind for me around the cross, is just that intersection point between these different orientations, if you will, and how that links to alignment and orientation. And yeah, I don't have the words. Daniel, I don't know how your internet is, but we'll have a look. We'll have a look and see. Your picture was a bit funny, but I think it might be better now.
Is it working now? Hello? I did switch it up. You can see me? Oh, well, if it messes up, when you have these storms come in Virginia, I apologize. It's okay. I apologize. I can try to switch it again. It is also interesting to think, what is prayer if you don't believe in angels versus you do? Like, there is something about like what is like if it's interesting to think of prayer, believing in angels versus not. And there's almost a kind of interesting suggestion of, is there something dangerous about prayer if you don't take it all? Like, like you can only, like, is there actually something very problematic if you're praying without an understanding that there's actually, that the entire world is actually then kind of in all aspects actually full of the potential of the divine, right? And that there are these beings and messages and all of there's an unseen realm. Like, I think there's an issue where we have a prayer culture. The common prayer culture may reflect not actually a full unseen realm, like more of a kind of sanitized, like spiritual life or Sunday or a certain period, right? And that could make a very kind of different function of prayer. And there is something also about, like, if you don't believe in this full active unseen realm, then prayer is probably, unfortunately, going to be captured by a logic of the zeitgeist and just be serving that zeitgeist in what's going on. As opposed to, like, when you're talking about, if we think about, that's interesting to think of prayer as kind of where horizontal and the vertical meet, like where those things go together. Um, there is something about prayer that does seem to say that as you're on the horizontal, you're trying to bring the vertical to bear on it, actually. And like, you're trying to say, okay, so how is the vertical in play here? How is it active here? Right? Now, I do say, for me, there is a different, like, if you're praying, and again, I'm looking at the model of the right, because even like Jesus in the garden, Gethsemane, right? It's kind of like, hey, if you can take this cup, so be it. But if it's your will not to, so be it. But that means the prayer is deferring to God's will, right? Like, there's a deferral going on to something that's already occurring, right? And I do wonder if a helpful way to think about prayer is praying in order to actually basically it's almost more perhaps to a certain degree to receive revelation of how this is unveiling or participating in what God is doing. Like, I see the horizontal, but what is the vertical here? What's going on in the vertical? What is the role of the vertical? Or kind of being like, God, I'm really mad right now, and I think my neighbor is a complete jerk. How are you working in this? What does it say about me? What do you want me to learn in this? Right? Like, what is the role here? Right? Or you say, I'm feeling anger. Like, I'm feeling this. Why? Like, you're seeking revelation. Right? I think there's something about prayer that can be trying to see how this, in a sense, is for you, or what this can teach you, or how this can have you participate in what God is doing. Where you're actually you're praying for eyes more than to receive an object that you want, right? Like, because there's this idea in Christianity of wanting God, right? Like wanting God, right? And you want a relationship with God. Well, tied to that can be wanting to see what God is doing. Like, I want to know, what God is doing and how God is in this and how this is for God, and trying to work to actually see those things. And thus you're actually working to participate. And in this way, if everything, if everything is good that's brought to God in a spirit of thanksgiving, which, is very interesting to me, like this idea that actually everything is good if only brought with a spirit of thanksgiving, then again, that would be another reason why nothing has to be repressed before God, why nothing actually has to be kept out of prayer. Because what you're actually doing in prayer is actually trying to figure out how to receive it with a spirit of thanksgiving. And that might also get tied to, I think, the cross and the grief question. Because how can you receive tough stuff in life according to a spirit of thanksgiving, right? Or tragedy or terrible things? Like, how can you have a spirit of thanksgiving in that, right? That's not self-evident. But there could be something about prayer that is actually trying to have that unveiled to you, or trying to see that, or trying to feel that. And then here's the issue: seeing how God is working through difficulty, if it's just an intellectual undertaking, is not going to work. It has to be in the body, right? And it really isn't complete until it comes out in worship, right? Until it comes out in like really kind of worshiping God. And so there is, I think, what Luke is saying, a certain movement into the body that becomes necessary. But I think, I guess, just as a final little point, if there is something about prayer that is working to have you seeing how God is acting, or how God is using this, or what this could mean to have revelation for God, then you can also see what it means to pray without ceasing. Like, you're praying without ceasing. Like, you're constantly wondering, you're constantly working to see how God is working here. So there's a constant participation that is enacted. And that would also mean, like, we really need to pray as if we believe God is a living God. Like, do you believe God is living? Do you believe that he's really active? Or do you believe he's only active when you call on him? Or he's only active when he gets around to it? Like, if you believe God is active, that Ansalon is on the move, as it goes, and you want to see how he's active, and you don't want to miss a beat, of how he's active in all things, then you're praying without ceasing, precisely because you want to be constantly seeing how God is acting. But you see, I do think often what removes us, I think the things that remove us from seeing how God is acting are usually crosses. It is usually a cross activity that we don't take up, or it is something that would demand, or something that, like a belief in angels, or thinking about angels that can be seen as foolishness, or demands like a real full openness to an unseen realm that would be just totally alien. But that's actually it, but that's what those kind of levels can keep you from actually seeing how God is working. But again, I think there is something about prayer that is about this constant work to be seeing how God is working, and to be participating in that.
There's something too that I guess there's sort of questions around what all of this means about the manner in which we receive the call, maybe there isn't just one answer to it. But we can sort of sit here and talk about, the importance of just being able to discern what is sort of a genuine communicational call versus something that is just, generated of one's own mind and imagination. But then what is it that we can say about that discernment? Like what is it is there anything that we can say about the manner in which these things arrive? And I know, like we've obviously all talked before too in various configurations about the importance of preparation of oneself for that. Or sort of even just thinking about the body, the sort of like the body is like the vessel through which, like preparing as best we can to be able to receive in that manner. I just think about people for whom this is all brand new to, and like hearing these words, hearing this conversation, and yet still just sort of being mystified by how on earth practically they are therefore meant to. What does that even mean? Like, well, so I can sit and I'm trying to do this prayer thing, and sometimes like some ideas pop into my head, or like I have a tingle in my arm, or like like what so like what am I supposed to do with that? What is one of those coming from an angel? Is one of those coming from like just like a dead arm that I need to move? Like what? And I know I'm not, and I know you both know this, I'm not asking the question because I think there's an answer that we're just going to be able to spout out. But I think that that's sort of where I'm wondering as we're all talking right now in terms of what can we say? And I can say probably the least. I really have very little to say on that I think would be useful to anyone. But the qualities of, and again, these are just fumbly words, but something to do with the qualities of what we receive, sort of being more like a call as opposed to just something that we are manufacturing ourselves, or yeah, I don't know. Do either of you have anything to contribute to that one? How do we know? How do we make that discernment?
Well, maybe I can chime in here because I think there's quite. Maybe I'll say this is my view. How do you know if you've eaten bad food? How do you know when you need to expel it? It's not an intellectual thing, though it might be expressed that way. But there's I sense a quality, an impulse, an energy that moves me. And I feel very strongly, and my experiences indicate to me that the body is the instrument that is, because of it is built on all of the cosmic laws of reality, and for it to function, it can't lie. If it lies, we die. So it has to be true to whatever there is. That the perception in us of those qualities of energies, being able to sense in a very tangible way those energies, is, I think, and a very important part of beginning to discern the good food from the bad, if I put it like that. Because otherwise I'm left up to my intellect alone or my feelings alone. And at least in my experience, boy, do I have to take all that with a big grain of salt. But the body is very much grounded. We use all these language and poetry about, how one is able to feel lighter, or heavy, or contained, or free. And these are all expressions of how this is, in one sense, felt in the body. And that gives then an orientation that the feelings can inhabit, and then the mind can give some kind of expression to. But for me, it's not the other way around. The mind's wonderful at being able to try to express something in a rational format, or at least in some kind of logic that allows dots to be joined for other humans. But how do I have a strong taste of whatever comes in, whatever I'm under? And to understand is to be under something, to be influenced by something. How do I know what's more true, more whole, more good, as opposed to the other way? So and that's where in the modern Western world we've kind of lost so much contact with the embodied side. We just keep assuming it's the physical lump of meat we are, and the intellect is far more important, maybe followed by the feelings. Who knows? Feelings get in the way, but the body is not really seen as useful. But if you look at the ancient past, you know, you look at all of the practices, everything begins with the body, because the body is the receptive instrument for all of these complexities of sort of energies that allow us to orient ourselves in a different way. Now, of course, the practice of it, what is more whole, what is more good? Well, there's a whole practice and science behind it. But my experience is people innately know what is a movement towards more wholeness and what is a movement away from it. Because when we move away from it, we try to avoid it like the plague because we suffer greatly. We get trapped inside. We feel as though we're caged kind of animals. There's no light. I'm suffocating. But yet when I'm moving towards something that can nourish me on the inside, and I feel that something's more expansive in me, filling out every part of my body, I feel that aliveness, not in the sense of the desires and impulses for basic instinct, but something that I feel is more whole is the only word I can find. It includes without discarding anything. And yet something else can emerge from it. And certainly from my own, the tradition that with the body is which I haven't even appreciated, even though I've been attached to it most of my life in some way, shape, or form, from sports medicine and sports science and all those sorts of things. Just how disconnected we are culturally, communally, because we relegate the body as just a thing. And if we treat the body as a thing, we treat ourselves as a thing, we treat everybody else as a thing, and things can easily just be dispatched, discarded, because we don't see it as a living embodiment of all of these deep, literal cosmic energies which are being brought to bear in our world. And so that very much changes things. And if I'm feeling certain qualities of energies in me, I'm not just my body. In fact, something else can live inside me quite independently from the body. Because you are human, there must be some capacity in that for you. And if whatever this thing is that grows, that is independent of the body, then it must exist, reside in some other place other than what we see in the physical world. Because we only see a sliver, of course. So this broadening of the perceptions, and this is in the Gospels, actually there's quite a lot in the Bible around being able to increase one's perceptions, which is not an intellectual thing. And that's not to judge the intellect. The intellect is very important, but not at the expense of the feelings and particularly the body. Because at the end of the day, the only thing we can really know, and not just infer, is the inside of our own bodies.
going to say very quickly, Daniel, I know you're ready. I see your microphone is ready. As you were talking, Luke, I was thinking about, I had like an image of, you were talking about the aliveness and sort of like that feeling of aliveness and how that's separate to what we might call sort of more traditionally the emotional. Yeah. And I was thinking about like, it's almost like light kind of moving right through around the body, through the veins, like kind of like light. And I was just thinking about how sort of like light, sort of undifferentiated or something. There's something about it that has a wholeness, as opposed to something more like emotions. I think about, again, it's just imagery stuff, but more like it's something been refracted through a prism, and it's like it's a portion of something, but it's not the whole. And that feeling of, I think anyway, maybe that feeling of aliveness that one can experience. It is much more like that. It is. It's like an undifferentiated light. I don't know how else to explain that. Having troubles with the words today. I just thought that was very helpful, because it sort of brought that image into stark relief for me. Because there's obviously the experience of that is very different to sort of a strain of something that you're like, oh yeah, that feels like this emotion or that one or this. There's something it has a wholeness. Yeah.
No, I think that wholeness is critical. And I very much like what Luke was saying about this idea that, how do you know if it's bad food? There's just this reaction, right, that just occurs, which I think there are certain problems on how can you tell like what's just a movement on or God's action, that if you try to think of in the mind, you can't figure out. But if you try to think through it out the entire body, the emotions or whatever, you can actually tell clear as day, right? And so seems to be problems that we try to solve using our mind that can't be solved. But if you brought in the entire experience of the body as an antenna, as we've talked about before, then actually you can see what's going on, right? And I think that is a big part of prayer. Again, if I just speak more personally, I have always associated so much like when God at the end is like, I'm making all things new, write these words down, they're trustworthy and true. Like there's something about Christianity that is really tied to this idea that all things are being made new. And this is major. And for me, there is something about prayer that is actually participating in the newness and making all things new. And there is something about actually the feelings in the body, like paying attention to those that are like, this is part of making things all new. This is actually part of the outer darkness into which all things are cast, right? And you can actually feel that difference. And there's even things like, again, I've experienced prayer too as really tied to there's something you feel like you're supposed to do, but you're not entirely sure. And there can actually be something about prayer that is a kind of thinking that's more of a kind of counseling or even debate. I don't want to say debating, like arguing with God, but it's like, but hold on, shouldn't it be this or that or so forth? It's a kind of thinking that feels more like a dialogue. And it is, I want to say a Socratic dialogue in a certain sense, but it's also not like arguing, but it's a more of receiving sort of posture that's based on not just some postulation that you're interested in randomly, but relative to a feeling that you have of something that's supposed to be done or something you need to focus on. Like you feel a little something in you that's saying, pay attention here or do this. And prayer can be like okay, I'm not saying no, but why? Or like, give me clarity or when. I think there's prayers tied to when questions, like I think and stuff like that, where it's really trying to clarify something I almost want to say. Like it's like prayer is you've got this, you've been shown the image, but you need to clarify the aperture maybe or move it to get it into focus. And that the emotional state of your body could be an indication if you're gaining clarity or confusion. Like there's something about prayer that is anti-confusion, but there's something about prayer that's trying to be unconfused, not legion. And the problem is if you knew how to not be confused, you wouldn't be, right? But you are. So then there's this kind of weird thing where even like there's things you can't cease being confused about by just thinking. You need the entire body as an antenna. in order to actually be guided through, which gets tied. There is something about prayer and authentic resonance that I think go together, as we've talked about SBC with Seth. And the thing is that there it is a kind of thinking and consideration and orientation of the world that is following something that's leading you. Like it is a thing. I want to say there's a mode of prayer is a kind of mode of understanding of something leading you. Whereas I want to say thought is more proactive, like you're leading, maybe that might be a way to put it. Whereas in prayer, you're being led, and you're trying to figure out how to think to be led by this thing. But this thing that you're being led by, you can't put entirely into words, right? But you can feel it. That's why I think the only way you can think, like Christians will talk a lot like being led by the Spirit, right? I think often when they say that, they're talking about being led by the feeling in the body. Like the body is how you get led by the Spirit. And then prayer is trying to bring thought into the body, with the body, into this experience to actually kind of figure out the implications of it, right? Because I want to say, because there's a bunch of things. Sometimes you can see people pray in a manner where they're like trying to work themselves up into something. Like they're praying to trying to like be the most to be emotional, to kind of bring the Spirit. And there's something performative about that can be very, very problematic, or because the thing is, I think what you are right to point to, that there's something dangerous about prayer in which one can see if this is mishandled, it actually could lead to a whole lot of various psychological problems, right? Performatism, repressions, and things like that. And I think generally the prayer culture has not taken that seriously, right? And actually opened up a lot of confusions and treating God like Big Brother and all this other stuff, right? And I better pray or something bad will happen. It can be OCD, it can be nerve-wracking, and so on and so forth, right? And so for me, it's really important to get the prayer stuff right, precisely because it can cause so much damage if done wrong is actually evidence to me that it's super important to get right, because it seems to actually have kind of a fundamental level. But I think basically what's interesting, I guess, on the example of, I bring up this example of somebody working themselves up into prayer. It's as if they're trying to summon their body to act when they haven't trained their body to feel. Like they're trying to work their body into doing something that the correct posture of prayer, the body would already be doing, right? Like the very fact that you see this effort to work up the body almost suggests there is a subconscious understanding that the whole body needs to be brought into prayer. Like in the same way that people work themselves up in worship, because there's this idea that actually how your body acts in worship matters, but because there's not the right preparation and training, it can go on the side of performatism, which I don't want to say that has no potential role. God, I think God blesses misunderstandings too. So I think, et cetera. But there's always dangers in these things that one has to take seriously, and one would have to expand on that. But I do think that there's a subconscious understanding that the whole body is to be involved. But the issue is the prayer is supposed to be, there's a being led by the body, which is the antenna for the Spirit. And if you try to bring, so there's I know I was cutting out there. But so there's an idea of where what we're saying is if you're praying in a manner that's trying to work your body up, then there's a misordering there. Whereas if your body is getting the antenna of the Spirit and you're praying actually to be aligned with that movement of the Spirit, that is the right way the body is supposed to be involved. And if you don't do that, then you're going to get a culture of trying to force the body in. But that's going to almost be too late. It's going to be performative. It's going to be, and that actually contributes to, I think, forms of repression. But yeah, I'll stop and then hope my internet gets a little better here. I greatly apologize this evening. But there's something about, I think, what Luke is saying that is extremely important, because for me, I almost want to say I experience prayer as something activated when the body moves first. Like there are people who talk about prayer, and I don't want to say this is wrong. You should pray 3 times a day or before you go to bed, like this idea of a kind of regimented notion of prayer. And I don't want to say that doesn't have a role, and because it could be training, it could be very good. I'm not saying it doesn't have a role, but for me, there's something interesting about, there's something almost that feels prayer activated when something is moved in the body toward the spirit, which is toward the way that God is making all things new. And there's something about the prayer that's actually almost the consulting of what that was, or to trying to align with that. Because if the spirit is moved, you could misunderstand it, and then there's real jeopardy. So you're wanting to kind of test it, or kind of, was that me, or was that just the spirit? But it was the spirit, and you're testing it with the word, et cetera, so forth. But it is very interesting to me that there's a movement of the body first that is kind of activating it. Now, that gets into then, therefore, I think prayer. I don't know if we've already talked about it. I believe we talked about it last time. I'm not sure if you can get a proper understanding of prayer without a doctrine of sanctification that is actually participatory, sacred romance that we've talked about. Like, if your entire understanding of the world is not actually basically a kind of giant journey into the fullness of life, then I think prayer becomes difficult to understand. But if you say no, the body is like the essential antenna for following the sacred romance and sanctification, and prayer is part of the active communication with God on how that's going and how it's unfolding. I think also, I guess I also want to say there's something about prayer as actually figuring out how to talk with other people. Like, there's something about prayer that is actually like, okay, God, how do we talk about this thing with other people? Right? Like, to present this with other people so that it's not, like overwhelming, or it's in the right timing. Because there's something about like learning how to speak in the right way. I do actually sometimes think about prayer as there's something social about it, but it's training for being part of a community in the journey of the sacred romance and sanctification. Like, actually to be around and figuring out how to sense and work with those energies. Now, that's a different side of this, but those are some thoughts.
Yeah, I very much like the emphasis on it's almost like the body. I don't know that you quite said this, but like the body brings you to prayer almost. And again, I know prayer is used in different ways and all these things, but in one sense, there's a way in which I feel that I come to prayer that is about the first part is it's the coming up against my own limitations. It is the noticing my smallness, and that I experience. That's not intellectual for me. I mean, it can be, but like at its core, like its deeper sense, it's not an intellectual thing. That happens in the body, and there's an experience of that in the body that that is kind of the thing that then brings it. It just brings me to prayer. I don't know how else to explain it. And I think that that probably just relates to also earlier on when Luke, you were talking about the appealing to something that is other than human. So it's not even the impulse is not, oh, I could sort of pick up the phone and call this wiser person. It's an acknowledgement that there's not even a human kind of answer, or it's a being pulled to seeking from or connecting to that which is not human, that is bigger than all of us. There's something about that does happen in the body, and just sort of like more recently, it's almost like the sense I have, and I don't know if this makes any sense at all to anyone else, but the sense I have is it's almost like there's something that kind of orients me to prayer that feels, I don't know if it's an angel, but like this kind of is where like angels kind of turn. It's like, it's almost like I feel like a something else that helps to remind me, or to I don't know what words you put to it, But that also sort of feels like it happens in the body. There's some sort of movement or something that feels like, and I don't know what other word to put to it than angel right now. So like I'm just looking around for some words. But it's not God, and it's not me. So it's like some other, I don't know, that an angel just feels like it fits. It just feels like something sort of orients me in those moments to, if we call it prayer. And I mean, I guess we could just talk about that even as what is it in that moment that allows, from the multitude of things that I don't even want to say brain, that from the multitude of things that's available to me to be aware of in that moment, what is it that helps knock that over, orient me to return to prayer, or to return to, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but there's some kind of intermediary step or something else that's going on that is also not me, that brings me to prayer. So something in that, I liked what you were saying about the body, because that feels right in terms of my experience of it thus far, which is tiny. Yeah, I'm going to clean up this mess that I've created here now, while orienting my arm to the conversation. Yeah, there's a cosmic joke going on somewhere.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I mean, at least for me, I'm quite convinced that being human, we are naturally oriented towards prayer, towards heaven, something higher, the unseen, whatever it might be. And it seems that our entire life is kind of a preparation for that. I think we spoke at some point about, when you're a child and your God for you is your mum and dad, and then it expands out to siblings and mentors and so on and so forth as something in us grows and expands. And then when you hit a limit of, wow, there must be something beyond human, because humans seem to be pretty good at being able to do stuff. But there's clearly stuff they can't do. Otherwise, we would have killed ourselves long ago. And what's that? And then there's like a natural opening. Sometimes it feels almost like it's like sexual attraction in a certain, the body like just almost wants to move towards whoever you are attracted to. And it's interesting. It's quite a strong force. And I'm always very interested in who I might be attracted to, because from my head point of view, I go, why? But yet the body, and it's almost like that same force or that same movement at some point gets, if it can, gets reoriented to something else. And there's that same pulling. And so it's interesting, what are the conditions that I find myself in when I'm a bit more open to whatever that force is. And it really is a force. I certainly feel it in the body. It changes my posture. It changes everything. What are the conditions that allow that to happen? And in a sense, the conditions that allow that to happen are essentially the conditions that allow prayer or worship or thanksgiving, gratitude. There's something about that. But also, I feel a great deal of preparation that works its way in me over a long period of time to even allow an opening. And this for me is where the inner work becomes important, because it's not like I'm open and then I stay open. It's I'm open and then I close, I open, I close, I open, I close. And it's studying this, what closes me, what takes me away from that, and what opens me up to it in a intelligent way. And essentially that's almost the entirety of the spiritual inner work is to look at that, to study it very practically. And again, for me, it's always there's something in the body that's going on. There's an energy that is there, or that's allowed to be there, that then provides the soil for something to be seeded, grow, open to sunlight, whatever it might be. And then there are things that absolutely take me away from it. And it may not be obvious because the body, in terms of the physical thing, is obvious, but the energy stuff of what's occurring through it is often for me not obvious, and does take a lot of time to go, okay, what happened there? I didn't see it. And then when one begins to see something, and it starts off with a sensation of the body, because that's how we perceive energies. It's not just a neuron firing, even though that's part of it. There's something else going on. And so this is this very interesting, which we use in our language a lot when we sense things. What the hell does that mean? Right? Okay. We have a sense, right? We can't use the word ESP or anything like that. We can't use the Holy Spirit's leading me. God, you can't say any of that. But there's a sense. There's a sense that the body is picking up on something. And the more we can develop that sense, then hopefully the more we can sense what's needed. And even my own self, I hopefully over time I'm getting a little better at it, but I feel as I'm woefully unqualified. But there is something where I go, I can feel the rumblings. I can feel yep, something's about to come over me. And so what do I need to do to either avoid, ameliorate, or work with that? Because often if I'm not attuned to it, I just get hit with it. And then I react. And then it's normally go nuts, or it's so overwhelming, I crawl up into a little ball. And so that's interesting, because that then says to me very clearly, there are all these movements of energies around us that we're just not in contact with. And the only thing that's able to be the appropriate instrument to detect those signals or influences is the very thing we've been given. And we've been given it. And that's our body, because it's made from the very stuff that we're trying to see. So this for me is in one sense, this spiritual inner life becomes very, very simplified, though there's a lot of rich material there.
When you were talking about sensing, so Dallas Willard has that phrase where he talks about the divine conspiracy, where he talks about kind of like divinity and the spirit is kind of in operation subtly. It's very subtle, and it's kind of in operation. There is something about the divine conspiracy, and I would associate angels with these kind of whispers. There's these kind of whispers and these senses of this, not that, this, not that way. And often people will talk about God's voice, and perhaps that is functionally equivalent to a way to think about angels here. And again, perhaps we can think about angels too, as there's a lot of people talking about Ecuadors, game theory problems, and stuff that I would call the demonic conspiracy, which is the kind of forces where everyone's trapped in a multipolar trap. I associate the demonic with these forces, and Luke and I talked about it, with these forces where everyone feels like we're being taken somewhere and we don't know how not to end up there. Like we can't stop ourselves, like the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of these things. So there's something where I like to think of the demonic conspiracy is very cunning. Like it's this way of setting up the situations where you can be incredibly rational, and that actually makes it worse. Where the divine conspiracy whispers, and it's very subtle. Like there's something very subtle and discreet about it. And where the demonic conspiracy has actually a lot of logic and a lot of thinking and a lot of energy, but all that does is make things smooth and slippery, and then you end up somewhere you don't want to go because you can't get texture. Whereas I think angels tend to whisper and say, do this, and you go, why? And they don't say anything else because your body knows. You know that it's right. Like often the whisper, you're like, yeah, I know. But and so it doesn't say anything else, right? There's actually just a whisper or a sense, if you will. And the difference between the demonic smoothness and cunning, being able to tell the difference between the divine conspiracy, the whisper, and the demonic operations that are pulling you in a place where then you're going to be pulled along, that being able to tell that difference totally relies on the body. Because if you're just using your brain, you're done. You're going to end up in the demonic conspiracy because you're going to end up in a game theory problem or an egregore or a logic that you can't stop, that runs outside of your control, right? But there's something about the body that when you bring the mind into the body together, now you have the possibility of catching the whisper and the sense of the divine conspiracy, if we use that language. Now, something I also want to say is I would argue there is something about the only way you hear the whispers, though, of the angels, if you will, is actually by actually facing crosses. Like that's the other thing, is like you actually will lose the ability to hear the whispers if you don't take up your cross, or if you don't do the difficult thing you don't want to do, or if you don't take up courage, right? And then all there will be is the demonic conspiracy, and then you're in major trouble. And there's also something about the demonic conspiracy that for me is tied to how thought self-relates to itself in hoping of making all otherness just the otherness of a dream that it has control over. And I call that dream equality. And all of that has to be expanded on, but I think it's part of what it means to be fallenness. But anyway, there's something about, it would seem to me as if praying, a way perhaps to think about it is praying is what is needed in order to prepare yourself to take up the cross. And again, the cross is not merely a challenge, but this challenge that maybe only you understand as a challenge, where while to everyone else it's crazy. Whereas if you don't hear that, you can't hear the whispers of angels to actually know, to get the senses Luke was talking about, to participate in how God is making all things new, the sacred romance, et cetera, so forth. And if you can't do that, you're basically destined for the demonic conspiracy of smoothness, ecuadors, game theory problems, dynamics, you get pulled along, and then you're done. Right. And so to me, to think of the three that you brought up, Aspasia, there is something, and again, I guess I would just say that's what I've experienced in my own life. I've experienced that, is how prayer can be tied to getting the spirit, building up the courage to actually take up the cross, and the body leads that. Like the body leads, and you're supposed to do, and then the prayer is part of actually following the body, facing the fear. Then the cross, once you do the thing of the cross, that at the time you may think is crazy, but you're supposed to do it, and everyone else may think you're crazy, and they don't even see it as sovereignty. They just see it as stubbornness or stupid or whatever. When you do that, then on the other side, you become better at hearing whispers. And then your prayer actually gets informed by that whispers, and the praying is now in contact and communication with the whispers and a kind of communing in the whispers, and that this process has a certain intensification of its quality with time. And I actually think also you get better at actually seeing you see the patterns people are trapped in. You see the demonic conspiracies. You see the merry-go-rounds people can't get out of. Like you can see these forces that people are stuck in, that are passed down from their parents, or that is due to the expectations of your coworkers. I mean, you experience the world like when Plato talks about fun, like you experience the world just as all of these patterns, these things that people can't get out of, these repetitions, we call them enclosures. And I think there is something about prayer to cross to the whispers, to the angelic, that actually also is the gaining of the ability to see these things people are trapped in. That is not a judgmental trapping, but a oh my gosh, spiritual warfare is real. Like, because when I say you see the traps that people are in, it isn't a judgmental thing. It's like, oh my gosh, there's this layer of reality that is enclosing everyone. There's a real war going on. There's a real battle going on. This is serious. And that is like, again, I do equate prayer and epiphany together, prayer and revelation together, like prayer and seeing. And I guess it's that seeing in the wizard, because you see the world really is under principalities. People's lives are really stuck in stuff that all their thinking can't get them out of. And you see that. And then you're also aware, oh my gosh, nobody intends to end up in this. And if I was in it, I wouldn't know. So then you pray without ceasing, because these enclosures are all, and you like, I'm really going to learn how to hear those whispers, because this stuff is always at play. And if I think I'm not at risk, I'm screwed. And so, but that I would associate that not with paranoia, but a kind of reverential fear, that you're really serious about the spiritual forces that you're working with, of which postures you toward the beautiful. So not the paranoid, because you actually see hope in it. You're just aware of the reality of what we're dealing with, that creates a certain healthy respect. And so then you become intentional about organizing yourself to have the openness Luke was talking about, to be toward the beautiful and to meaningfully participate in the sacred romance, and to kind of like dedicate your life to getting better at that. Because there are lots of challenges to that. How do you do that with your mother? How do you do that with friends? How do you do that with others, your children? Like, that question of how to do that is, there's the individual, then there's the social, and et cetera, right? But to me, when we associate the angelic with these kind of whispers of the divine conspiracy, to use Willard's phrase, Aslan on the move, and that is leading you to a place to see all of the enclosures that people are in, so you can have a real sense of what we are dealing with in being human. And then prayer is tied to the continual work of keeping that in mind, so you're aligned with how God is making all things new. Because I also associate, and I'll stop. I associate when God is saying all things are new, I'm making all things new. I associate that as well as I'm freeing people from their patterns. I'm freeing people from their enclosures. I'm freeing people from their bondages. Like, the old world, the world that needs to be made new, is trapped in all of these structures, these meta structures they can't get out of, these repetitions, their patterns. Like, people can't get out of them no matter how hard they try. And for God to make all things new is to move the world out of those enclosures. And that is what everything, like the way heaven is working through this world, is on a campaign to free people from those enclosures that they willingly put themselves in, though, because they dislike their neighbor, because they're angry, because they're mad at somebody, right? Like, we're willingly throwing ourselves into the lake of fire and not realizing we're doing it. And so we really have to be on guard and really working and learning to actually pay attention to those whispers. There's more to say, but I'll pause.
Well, that was extraordinary. And every time you say that would need to be expanded upon, I'm always tempted in the chat to write, expand now, please. Yeah, I like the whispers. And I was thinking too, as you were talking about that, about sort of like tickles, and like it's like the small and the subtle movements, versus the smoothness, which I know we've all talked about before, and things coming too easy, and oftentimes too intensely too, right? And kind of the I've been thinking the whole conversation really just about the parallels with AI, and the use of kind of the way that AI can be used as sort of a false god, and the who needs to pray, because we can just ask our large language model. It knows everything, and it will do a good job of at least convincing us that it does. And we'll feel very confident and secure in that. And if we need it to modify it slightly, we can do that too. We can ask it for more of this or less of that, or yeah, just what a frightening prospect that is, in all of this. And also, I think about, if we're going to talk about AI in that way, I just also think about the ease of access, like the ease with which one can just at any moment be sort of fed the kind of answer that they want. And that just, to me, links with all the smoothness that you're talking about there, and the kind of just the ease with which one can just slide through life. And obviously then all the messaging out there, that actually that is what we should be. That's what we should be chasing. That is the whole point of all of it. Don't worry, you're going to get yourself to a point where you can just, everything will feel good and easy. And I really liked the words you were using there, Daniel, and the use of the word texture, and not sure I have a lot more to add into it really, but yeah, stop for a minute.
I do associate, just as a note, I think, like, I associate the divine conspiracy or the heavenly with finding freedom in limit, where the demonic is freedom from limit. And basically, everything in our experience says freedom is from limit. We won't be bound by the body. We won't be bound by this world of determination. Everything will basically be a dream. And there's a way to use AI that is basically freedom from determination. I won't have to deal with other people. I can basically virtual reality. All of this is a kind of freedom from determination, and determination just being phenomenon in the world you don't control, right? We want freedom from our genes, CRISPR technology, right? Like the technological essence is toward freedom from limit, right? Or freedom from binding, right? But it doesn't have to be. This does not mean, though, technology is bad. It's that when we're dealing with incredibly powerful things, if we fall under the demonic conspiracy, then we're going to use these very powerful tools for the demonic conspiracy, or you could use it for the divine conspiracy. So this is not saying technology is bad, but you see, like, really, the fullness of the human being is found actually in choosing, because you have to choose this. Like, this is kind of faith too, because it is not self-evident that freedom is found in limit. It seems self-evident that freedom is found from limit, right? Like, that just is obvious, right? It's the exact opposite. When you're not bound by anything, when nothing can hurt you, when there's nothing, like, you actually die. Like, limit is what creates texture. And of course, the ultimate limit is God. So freedom in the limit of God, because you're not God, right? And you see, what has to occur is basically, if we don't follow the whispers, we're going to fall into the temptation of seeking our fullness from limits, not honoring something that binds us, like religio binding, right? That's a freedom in limitation, freedom in determination. And then, of course, it turns out that limit, freedom in limit, is actually for you, and it's how you have unlimited. There's a kind of irony here that one has to go into. When you get freedom from limit, you think you're unlimited, but actually you're nothing. But when you have freedom in limit, now you have texture and it's unlimited, because it turns out the limit moves and ever develops, and it's the limit of a mystery, which is the limit is actually just the ever possibility of more. It's an excess limit, actually. It just turns out that there's always more to do. And so the limit is actually for you in that way. It's more like the limit of a horizon than it is a wall. And it's just that you had to have the faith to believe that you had to choose, like, you had to choose the limit in order to find out it was a horizon. If you don't choose it, you never find out it's a horizon. And so you don't actually have that ever expansion, right? Like, if you don't choose the mystery, you never find out that a mystery is something that ever deepens. You take it as an unknowable, right? But if you seek freedom from limit, you never get the experience of a horizon, and thus you're bound. In the name of being free, it's entropy. There's equilibrium. It's nothing, right? And I think also, too, I guess, is just as a note, it's a giant claim. I also do associate prayer in the spiritual life as using imagination for limit, not from limit, and thus using all of our inventions for limit. So what I mean by that is, typically we naturally use imagination to fantasize, to imagine alternative lives, as opposed to using imagination to seeing, I want to say, the metageometry or the forms or the divine life of all phenomenon right in front of us. Like, because, like, you have, like, the divine world is, like, in operation right in front of you, in the phenomenon, in the world, right? And if you didn't have imagination or abstraction, you couldn't actually experience that, because it's in your immediacy, but also beyond it. It's incarnational, it's sacramental, it's there and not there at the same time. So abstraction and imagination are necessary for actually experiencing the ever deepening mystery of all things that are in front of you, right? And I think the sacred romance and following the whispers is training imagination to be in service of witnessing the full, ever-deepening mystery of whatever is around you, which, if you don't do that, you're going to use imagination in service of fantasy. And fantasy is freedom from phenomenon, freedom from the world. And the problem is, I also want to say, so therefore you're trying to make the world like a dream, basically, which means you're in control. It's just a dream. Well, everything that's like in a dream, there's a world that actually seems like it's other, but it's actually in your control always, right? Like you're kind of in control, and I have to expand on this, but basically what ends up happening is there's a real sense where the war, like spiritual warfare, is about what controls imagination. Like it's all about what controls imagination. Will imagination serve the body? Will it serve the phenomenon? Will it honor the body? Or will it try to imagine itself free in fantasy from the body, right? The demonic conspiracy is about getting imagining on the side of freedom from limitation, using technology, using AI to be unbound. Whereas the divine conspiracy is about getting us to use imagination to experience the sacramental ontology that is around us at all times, and to use AI and technology in service of that, to use AI and technology in service of experiencing the fullness of the world around us, as opposed to making fantasies where we can avoid it. Because the reason why we want freedom from limit is because limit means you encounter negativity, pain, difficult, cross. Like you're not going to find freedom with, you're going to have to suffer, right? So freedom in limitation requires suffering. But if you don't do that, then imagination is not going to serve your ability to actually, because what I'm also saying is imagination is actually supposed to move from mere images in the mind to the body. Like you actually doing the stuff what like Luke is talking about is actually where your body participates in imagination, because I think imagination is actually the mind catching glimmers and glimpses of the divine life. But because there's freedom and we don't have to train it, we can actually use that to make ourselves like God in the Eden, make ourselves the divine life, right? And that becomes a freedom from limitation. And so I think prayer, following the whispers, facing negativity, all of these become necessary to not give in to the temptation without realizing it, of seeking freedom from the body or from limit or from suffering. And then the claim I would make is many people are trapped in enclosures or patterns or repetitions because they're seeking a freedom from negativity, from suffering, from the difficult thing, as opposed to finding a freedom in the limit, meaning they face it. They do the thing they don't want to do. And that's what actually breaks them out, right? And so definitely a challenge of technology. Like I do think there's something about our moment, which is like we have to and all of this has to be expanded on, and then you can put in the chat, expand on it. But is that our moment is at a point in the technological development where basically we have to in a very real sense, consciously choose freedom in limit and to work imagination in that direction, or else we're just subconsciously, because of the Ecuadors and for use it in service of disembodiment. Like we really have to be aware of this. Like there's a moment in this history that is apocalyptic. It has that kind of apocalyptic feel, and I think we just have to be very, very, very conscious of the stakes, and to choose to basically give ourselves over to the whispers, or we're going to be pulled along by the smoothness of the temptation of freedom from limit. And that is going to that's going to take us somewhere that we think we want to be, but we find out when we get there, we don't want to be, but the ramp is too smooth to climb back up.
This is what I often talk about as sort of the pursuit of freedom in a way that leads to just more superficiality, as opposed to freedom that is related to depth and the ability to grow something and to actually experience depth. And for a variety of reasons, I think now more than ever, we are able to experience a kind of intellectual idea of freedom, because there's ever more choice and possibility, and exactly like you just said, much more beautifully than I'm going to say, but rather than have to knock up against things that are very painful and difficult to contend with, and sort of integrate all those parts of experience together, and all of these things, rather than that, the mind can flit to the next thing, and can generate an image of something else or a different kind of meaning it can make from this moment or whatever it is, that can get us out of something that feels much more, let's use the word painful, but it's a negativity, like however we want to talk about it. And so there is something I see this a lot with the work with people, is this. It's a real difficulty. It's a real challenge to sort of commit to something. We could use the word commit, or to sort of like deepen something or stay with something or hold something. There's all sorts of ways we could talk about it. Really notice the fullness of even a particular feeling, all of these things. It's difficult to do that because they often get hooked into an idea around freedom, right? That is somehow incompatible with like a freedom. And it seems to be increasing this, I'm seeing this more and more with people. And I do think a lot of that is to do with the signaling that's going on in culture at large. But probably just demonic forces taking hold, if we put it in those terms. This idea that the ultimate freedom is really just being able to abandon anything at any moment and kind of move on to the next way of understanding it, or move on to the next, whatever. Which in and of itself, like I want to be clear, in and of itself, we obviously all have a choice and an ability to do that. It's not necessarily a judgment on that per se. It's the packaging it up as freedom. I don't know how else to explain it. It's the making meaning of it as it's a good move or a right move because it is to do with freedom. And I just think the word freedom is a very interesting word, is what I'm trying to get at. And you explained it much better just before, Daniel, but it's fun to try and put my words to it anyway. There's something about, superficiality versus depth. And obviously there is a discernment there too. I'm not trying to imply that we should be trying to be with every single negativity or but there is something in all of that. And there was something too that this was bringing up, and I am aware of time. I don't want to keep you both too much longer. There was something I was going to bring up earlier too that completely slipped my mind. I'm trying to remember what you were talking about, Luke. You were talking about something, and I was thinking about how, you were talking about eating bad food. And I was thinking about there's some sort of version of that though too, that once again, I think can be confusing for people, because I think anxiety can manifest for all sorts of different reasons. And I think people's sort of understanding of that signal and precisely what that means is also tied up in all of this as well. But we'll save that for another day, because that's it's probably a whole thing. Yeah, there you go. I won't say much more because I am aware of time.
I don't have much more to add, but it just, as you were both speaking, it always reminds me of the question, what's the difference between a servant and a slave?
Well, I think that leads us into our next conversation. Click the link here. Wow, that's a great one. Anything on your mind, Daniel? Should we wrap up?
I think that's a magnificent question Luke brought up, and I always profoundly and greatly enjoy seeing both of you and speaking with you both. And so, thank you. I think, I think the topic of prayer is ground zero for this moment foundationally, and thank you for the chance to reflect on it.
Thank you both for being with the very unorthodox nature of throwing out 3 words like a game show and seeing what we can cook.
It's fantastic.
I appreciate you both very much.
Thank you.
I will get this up today at some point. So if there's
So
a
crazy
on my mind, I'm
Just
a
make it
crazy
happen.
person, Daniel.
It's
Come on.
incredible. Get it up on the same day.
Climbing the weird ladder that you laid out at the
That's
start. You said that's the ladder of weird. I liked that. The going from prayer to the cross to angels. It's the ladder of weird.
So
Um,
it's the ladder of weird.
that's what you said. I like that.
It's the ladder of weird. I
I like
did.
the
Yeah,
title.
it
Maybe
is.
it's a title.
Yeah, because it's easy to accept beauty like prayer, but then cross angels. I don't know. So
I
yeah,
don't
it's the ladder
know.
of weird.
Now she's
Yep,
going
yep,
nuts.
yep. But if you
Yeah.
don't climb it, you're gonna serve the demonic conspiracy, everyone, and it's gonna be smooth. It's either the ladder of weird or the demonic conspiracy of smoothness
The
to down
slide. The
a
slide.
slide you can't climb back up. When you were a kid, you could make your way back up the slide. Doesn't work that way. They've improved the model problematically. So yes, the divine land, the ladder of weird, or the slide of devils. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll think on that for the title.
Do we need to sing again? Oh, we didn't sing
No,
this time.
no.
Why do birds suddenly appear every time?
Oh,
Okay,
this is
that's
going to
good.
go
Yeah,
in.
that's great.
You're
Yeah,
going to
The
watch out.
Carpenters, love them, love them.
Yeah, the Carpenter. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh, we have their vinyl. We play it all the time. Good man.
Nothing
Good man.
superficial about that. See?
No.
All right.
Carpenters rock. Oh, yeah. Always a pleasure, friends. Thank you so much.
See you both. Thank you both.
All the best. Thank you.